Few months ago I made 2 videos about the impact of weight to your Zwift performance and they quickly became very popular. But they were fairly general and didn't really show the exact impact on different kinds of roads. And that's what I'm going to cover in this video. As you may know, there are 2 main ways of how weight impacts your Zwift riding. Firstly, it impacts the amount of raw watts you are able to produce. The heavier you are, the more watts you can usually develop, assuming the same level of fitness. That helps you mainly on flatter courses when there's not a big impact of gravity and raw watts are what really matters. The second way your weight impacts your riding is it influences your watts per kilogram of weight. The lower your weight, the more watts per kilo you have at the same raw power. That's slightly irrelevant on flat ground, but it's essential on climbs, and the steeper the climb, the more it matters. So I decided to analyze this. I will compare 9 different routes ranging from totally flat to straight up climbing, and I will take a look at how does the weight impact your time to finish the route. And I'll look at it in 2 different ways. Firstly, if the raw power is the same, and secondly, where the watts per kilo are the same. When the raw watts are the same, the rider with higher watts per kilo will be always faster. The question is, however, by how much on different routes. Similarly, when the watts per kilo are the same, the heavier rider will be always faster, as counterintuitive as it sounds, because they will be outputting way more raw watts. And there's also a third thing, but I'll return to that at the end. As the data source for the analysis, I'm going to use the Zwifter Bikes website. As usual, I will link it in the description down below so you can play with it yourself. For all comparisons, I'm going to use a rider 175 centimeters or about 5'9" tall, and, depending on the view, a flat power of either 200 watts or 3 watts per kilo. In all rides, I'm assuming 5% drafting effect, and even though it does not really matter very much, I'm using the fully upgraded Tron bike. For each route, I'm going to show you times to ride that route as 11 different riders, starting from 50 kilos and going through the scale up to 100 kilos. For both the raw watt analysis and watts per kilo analysis, I'll show you the time differences to the lightest rider and will also equalize those differences to 1 hour of riding. First up is the Tempus Fugit, a completely flat route. When riding at flat 200 watts, the light rider has an advantage because compared to the heavy rider, the power output equals to double watts per kilo. Even when using twice as much watts per kilo though, the light rider is only 3 minutes and 48 seconds faster, or equalized to 1 hour riding, 6 minutes and 37 seconds faster. When comparing both riders riding 3 watts per kilo, the heavy rider wins by almost 5 minutes, which is almost 10 minutes per hour of riding. That is because on flat route like this, the raw watts are really what matters. Then we have Volcano Flat, still a flat route but with some inclines sprinkled here and there. And compared to Tempus Fugit, you can see that the effects of the weight are very similar, but with the hillier terrain, they are getting somewhat more muted. And that is to be expected. With increasing elevation, the light rider will have more and more advantage when comparing flat watts, and will have less and less disadvantage when comparing watts per kilo. Third is Sundance Sequoias, a pretty flat route, but with a Titan's Grove climb in the middle. This is an example of somewhat flatter route that you can meet in the Z Racing series. And even though it is still rather flat, you can see the effects that one mild climb has on the results. When using the same raw watts, the light rider is almost 10 minutes faster than the heavy rider when equalized to 1 hour of riding. For comparison, in Tempus Fugit it was 6.5 minutes. When using the same watts per kilo, the heavy rider is faster by 9 minutes when equalized to 1 hour riding. Then we have Downtown Titans, and I chose this route because it is sort of an opposite of the previous route. Still a route that you can meet in Z Racing series, but it is definitely on the hillier end. When using the same raw watts, the light rider has already an advantage of over 10 minutes per 1 hour of riding. When using the same watts per kilo, the advantage of a heavy rider is more and more decreasing. Now let's move more towards the routes that you can meet more in specialized events like Zwift games, and the first one is Elevation Evaluation. This one is interesting because that is a flat route with huge climb and long descent. Compared to the previous route, it has only 100 meters more elevation gain, but the advantage of the light rider is starting to be really pronounced. Over 15 minutes per hour of riding when using the same power. When using the same watts per kilo, the heavy rider is now barely 8 minutes faster. Then we have the Climber's Gambit, and this is the first proper climbing route. It's got a rolling start and finishes in a climb up the Epic KOM reverse. We can already see that if we hold the same raw power, each 5 kilograms of weight equals to loss in time in about 2 minutes per hour of riding. When holding the same watts per kilo, the advantage of heavier rider jumped down about half a minute compared to the previous route. Last 3 routes, and now we are in the real climber's playground. First is Accelerate to Elevate, almost completely flat route but with a finish in the shape of up the Zwift climb. When holding the same power, the light rider is going to be about 20 minutes faster. Our 8th route is Tour of Fire and Ice, and actually it is quite similar to the previous one but with more climbing along the way to the up the Zwift base. When holding the same power, each extra 5 kilos of weight will lose you more than 3 minutes over 1 hour of riding. And finally, Pure Climbing, and for that I selected one of the new routes in France, Vingtaine. Almost 800 vertical meters over 10 kilometers of distance. Using the same power output, the light rider is going to be 25 minutes faster than the heavy one over 1 hour of climbing. When using the same watts per kilo, the heavy rider is still faster, but only by about 5 minutes over the route and barely 6 minutes over 1 hour of climbing. So, should you actually aim to lose weight? Especially since all it apparently takes is to train to be able to do the same watts per kilo as the light rider? Well, it depends. The problem with tests like this is it looks very good on paper, but in reality it is way more difficult for a heavy rider to maintain the same watts per kilo than for a light rider, because the increase in raw wattage with weight is not linear. So it's not like if you can maintain 200 watts at 50 kilos, you would be able to maintain 400 watts at 100 kilos just as easily. You wouldn't. And conversely, when you lose weight, it does not mean it's a zero-sum game either. It's not like if you lose half your weight that your power output is going to be suddenly half as well. When you lose weight in a healthy manner, your power output should decrease slower than your weight, which means your watts per kilo are going to go up. And as we were able to see in this analysis, that means riding faster. But as nearly all things in life, it depends on your own situation. If you are already 60 kilos and 5% body fat, you won't probably improve by losing more weight. Quite contrary to that, you will probably get worse because you will lose muscle. But if you have some extra pounds of fat and can lose weight in a healthy manner, so you are actually losing the fat and not muscle, it will be beneficial to your cycling. But there's one more thing. What about height? Height influences your cycling performance as well. Now I understand that if you are an adult, it is not very actionable and something that you can do much about, but it is still worth knowing how does height influence your riding on different kinds of terrain. So let's actually take a look at that as well. This time, besides all other caveats already mentioned, I'm going to use the same power output of 200 watts and the same weight of 75 kilos for all riders, and the only thing that changes is height, going from 150 centimeters or 4 foot 11 to 200 centimeters or 6 foot 7. And once again, I'll look at how the finishing time changes. Since it is pretty clear that the smaller rider will always be faster, I'm going to analyze 2 routes, the flattest one and the climbiest one, so we can see the magnitude of the impact. So let's return to Tempus Fugit and we can see that the short rider can finish the route 1 minute and 44 seconds faster than the taller one, which equals to over 3 minutes over 1 hour of riding. Of course, such difference is only as large if you are comparing such extremes. If you are comparing yourself to a rider that's only few inches shorter, the impact is about only 20 seconds on a route like this. Returning to the climbiest route, Vingtaine, we can see that the impact of weight is barely worth mentioning, with the difference being only 15 seconds between the shortest and the tallest rider over 1 hour of riding. And the reason for that is clear. Being taller means larger surface area and more wind resistance, and that matters only when you are going fast. So to conclude, the flatter the route, the bigger impact of your height, and also the faster you are going, also the bigger impact of your height. Thank you guys for watching. If this video was helpful, leave a like, subscribe. I'll see you next time.